Hello, ladies and gents, boys and girls, people of all ages, sexualities, and identities, and welcome back to another film/book review. And today's film/book review is none other than The Hunger Games. May the odds forever be in your favor. So, The Hunger Games, what is this film about? Well, it's about a dystopian reality in which kids are forced to play in games for their survival. The victors are rewarded and given everything they could ever possibly want, but it's a cruel and harsh reality that they live in. So let's get into the gist of the story. We're introduced to a young girl named Katniss Everdeen. Katniss comes from the district named District 12. She's preparing for the reaping of the Hunger Games whilst out in the forest with her friend Gale. Gale points out to her that he believes that the Hunger Games are a joke and that one day they won't have a games if everybody just stops watching. Katniss points out that she believes this is impossible as the games is what makes life worth watching. Gale points out how sickened he is by everyone watching the deaths of their friends. Meanwhile, back home, Prim begins to cry about the fact that she believes that she will be pulled from the reaping pot. Katniss points out that because she only has one name in the pot, it's very rare that they'll ever pick her younger sister. However, when the day comes, they do decide to pick her sister out of the lot, and Katniss decides to volunteer to save her sister's life. Alongside Katniss, a young boy named Peter Malark from District 12 is also picked. He is the son of a baker. The two are then taken off to the Capitol building where they say their final goodbyes to their families, and of course set off for Panem. Whilst on the train, they come across the drunk and an eccentric woman named Effie Trinket. Effie called both of their names out at the reaping, and Haymitch is basically just their mentor. Katniss and Haymitch don't quite get along all the way along their journey, but eventually Haymitch proves to be a worthy mentor. Once at the Capitol, they get cleaned down and prepared for their first viewing to the public. After being cleaned down, Katniss is introduced to her stylist, Cinna. Cinna comes up with a marvelous concept of basically getting her and Peter to be set alight whilst they go out on chariots to make District 12 stand out amongst them all. Leading up to the day of the games, Peter and Katniss must prove themselves in the training arena, ready for the games. After proving their skills to the game makers, they give them a rough idea of what they're in for. They're then all given a score from 1 to 12 or something. Katniss manages to score the highest score, which is 11. Before their main day in the games, Katniss and Peter both go on a talk show with a guy named Caesar Hitchman. Sorry, I meant Caesar Flickerman. Caesar Flickerman begins to introduce each and every tribute to the audience, and they take their turns in turn to essentially talk to the audience and give them a rough idea of who they are as a person. After this, they're then sent off to the games and go up through a tube into the arena. In the film, for most of the days, we find Katniss running in and out of places, getting attacked by fire, and most importantly, having to put ointment on her leg. She also comes into contact with Peter, who she believes has betrayed her at one point, and we find Rue helping Katniss to outsmart some of the other contestants. However, sadly, Rue is killed during an incident where she gets a spear to the chest. Katniss then teams up with Peter as the last two contestants of the games. The pair decide to pretty much play the game makers at their own game by getting ready to eat berries and sacrifice themselves. When this almost happens, it turns on the Capitol and pretty much puts them in a bad light. Without a significant victor, it puts them in dark waters. After her and Peter manage to win the games, it turns out that she has got a bad rep off of the capital and is in really dark waters. Haymitch and Effie do their best to protect Katniss, but know that dark days are coming. So, for anyone wondering that, I left some bits out of the film, no, that's because this is where we get into the talk about the book. So, essentially, the book plays out very, very similar to the film. However, there are some major significant differences. For instance, we spend more time in the book of Suzanne Collins exploring the life in the capital with Katniss and Peter. For a start, there's an AVOX girl, which an AVOX girl is essentially someone who's had their tongue cut out. Now, this is briefly touched upon in the films when Katniss and Gale are in the forest. However, it's never mentioned again, which I think is very unfortunate, as I believe it was a very significant and strong point in the book. In the books, the AVOX girl is brought up whilst in the capital when Katniss points out that she believes that she essentially recognises one of the people working in her hotel. Peter points out that she mustn't know who it is, but when Katniss eventually explains that it's one of the girls that was in the forest one day when she was out with Gale, Peter soon begins to understand the ramifications of her knowing who this girl is. Another strong plot point which I feel like was a letdown that wasn't in the film is Rue's backstory. Rue has a rich backstory which really casts District 11 in a darker tone than District 12. At one point whilst in the forest with Rue, it turns out that Rue explains to Katniss this idea that she thought District 12 was bad, but District 11 are basically treated like slaves. This is after a conversation in which Katniss discusses the fact that Rue comes from a farming district, and Rue points out this is true, but many people in the farming district starve due to the fact that the food is being sourced elsewhere. Another strong point in the book, I would say, is one of the dark plot twists towards the end, when we find out that the wolves that attack Katniss in the film are actually the dead contestants. The reason that this is such a dark turn is because you don't expect that after all the days that all the contestants have been dying in the arena, to find out that the bodies have been mutated for the Capitol's purposes and the game maker's pleasure. The other thing I like a little bit more in the book is the idea that we really get to spend enough time with Cinna and the stylists. I mean, it's briefly shown in the films that they've been staying in the same kind of compartment, but to really see Cinna embracing Katniss and trying to get across to her that he is trying to do the best for her is what's so beautiful. Now, another significant difference between the film, when I rewatched it this morning, and the book is Haymitch. In the film, Haymitch does his best to get Katniss bits and pieces. Now, this is not too dissimilar from what happens in the book. However, Haymitch waits longer in the book to help Katniss out for a very good reason, because he knows that Katniss can do a lot of stuff, that she can be resilient and determined. She will do what it takes to survive. There is a brief part in the book and in the film where Katniss and Peter kind of have a bit of a rant about the fact that Haymitch has not been helping Peter out. However, I feel like this is down to the fact that Haymitch doesn't necessarily see Peter as a weak person, but more to the point that he believes that Peter is less inclined to need the help. Both film and book point out the love-hate relationship and kind of lovers' image that the audience wants. And I love how in both iterations we find this kind of concept in which Katniss and Peter are always at each other's throats. The book also goes a little bit more into detail about a character that's not really talked about very much in the films, which is Thresh. Now, Thresh is the one who ends up killing the girl to do with the murder of Rue.
He lets Katniss live on the basis that he respects her enough, and pretty much says that he's going to let her off for now due to the fact that she had let Rue live. However, the interesting concept I think about Thresh in the book is how Katniss describes the idea that he has been waiting in the Outlands, and Thresh has been spending most of his time in parts of the arena that no one would dare to go to, such as the swamp and deep uprooted parts of the forest. Another interesting thing I think about the book is the fact that Katniss refers to one of the contestants as Foxface. Now, Foxface unfortunately dies in the film and in the book due to her accidentally eating berries that Peter picked up. Now, the one thing I like that was stretched out in the book is the fact that Peter stretches out his kind of remorse for Foxface's death. He doesn't mean for her to eat the berries, but it just kind of shows how if Katniss wasn't there, he would be dead too. Now, going back to the film, I do feel like there's two solid dark moments in the film itself. One of these core moments being Coriolanus Snow and his sinister undertone. The other being how Haymitch feels remorse at the act of people giving their children swords on the day of the Hunger Games. This is quite clearly due to the fact that Haymitch is most probably traumatized from his own time in the games, and although he comes across as a drunk in the beginning, he has his own undertone and backstory that is much more darker.
So, The Hunger Games. What did I think of it overall? It's a solid story, a great start, and most importantly, I feel like the book and the film give a really great dystopian opening to this series, and for that reason, I give it a solid 10 out of 10. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next film/book review. Until then, stay beautiful and have an incredible night.